All right, boys and girls, on this video, we're going to be talking about perimeter. And in fifth grade, you're going to be responsible, possibly on your test, to find the perimeter of a square or a rectangle, or in some cases, what's called a complex shape. Um, what we're going to talk about first here on this particular page is your mathematics chart or your reference materials that you'll be given on the test. Um, Most of the time, if you guys are presented with a question where maybe it again it is dealing with perimeter, area, or volume, that'll be one side of your reference materials. And so I'm just going to highlight a couple of things here. So I'm going to look at the top of this. I'm going to circle the top part here where it says perimeter, and you're looking really at these two formulas. So for perimeter of a square, it states perimeter equals 4s, which basically just means that you're going to take whatever one side of your square is and just times it by 4. And then if it's a perimeter of a rectangle, it says perimeter equals 2L plus 2W, which basically just means you're going to take the length times it by 2, the width times it by 2, and then add those two answers together. So perimeter is pretty easy. You guys have seen perimeter now for a few years. Usually, if you're going to see it in a fifth grade setting, they're probably going to make it a little bit more complicated. Maybe they throw decimals at you, maybe they throw some fractions at you, or possibly a complex shape. Sometimes they might give you something that has missing sides. But what I always kind of go back to with my students is a lot of times just go back to what you learned early on about perimeter, and that is think about what perimeter is. So think about things that are on the outside or the outside of the shape. A lot of teachers will teach the word rim is in the word perimeter. A lot of times you might be presented with a word problem, and it could be just like a real life scenario where you're thinking about something that deals with a perimeter, like a perimeter fence, or like a border around a picture, or a frame around a picture, something that's on the outside. And so if you are reading those things, you just kind of have to clue it back into what perimeter is. And the reality is you could sit here and do square and rectangle, and you can do these two formulas that you're looking at here on this page. But I think it all falls back on when you want to solve perimeter, you're basically just adding all sides. I always tell my students, yeah, these two formulas that you see here are good and they definitely work. But if you fall back on what you should know from your younger years, uh, and you just you learned that adding all sides is going to give you an answer to a perimeter problem, and that should get you by. And so we're going to look at just a few examples here and try to get perimeter back on your mind from the last couple years. All right, so on this page, really this is just our notes that we usually go over when we are looking at perimeter. And so I'm just going to go over a couple of things here. First, if it is of a square, you're thinking about P equals 4S. So in this particular case, you're looking at a square that has a dimension of 6. And so really and truly, you could just take this and you could write it a couple of different ways. One of them is you could take perimeter and you could take the 4 and you could just times it by the side length, which in this case is 6, and which is just going to take you to an easy multiplication fact of 4 times 6, which gives you 24. Since we're just leaving equations, a lot of times you might be asked to pick an equation to find the answer. So you could see it as 4 times 6. You could see it as something as simple as this: 6 plus 6 plus 6. Whoops, messed up there. Plus 6 plus 6, which would take you to the 24 again. And again, that kind of just falls back on what you learned at an early age of just adding all sides. And so it's really kind of just up to you on how you want to solve it. Again, perimeter should be pretty easy, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. If it's a rectangle below it, again, you see that formula, P equals 2L, 2 times L plus 2 times W. And so for this particular shape, you have a side length of 9, and then you have a width of 5. And so you could set this up as P equals 2 times 9. So I'm going to write it kind of like this, where I'm going to put the 9 in parentheses and then add it to the 2 and then the 5 in parentheses. And so you can go back on your your lesson from a few weeks back when we were doing order of operations, and you're sitting here and you're looking at a no symbol, so you know that that should be multiplication. And so 2 times 9 is going to give you 18, and then 2 times 5 is going to give you 10, and then you're going to add those two together, which would give you the answer of 28. So pretty simple, nothing to this really, other than, again, maybe just kind of going slow and thinking your way through these problems so you don't make a silly mistake. All right, on this last page here, I've put what's known as a complex shape. Complex shapes usually aren't your just traditional, quadrilaterals, rectangle, or squares. Usually what they'll do to throw you off a little bit on these is they'll add, they'll have maybe some dimensions that aren't there. In other words, they're missing sides or they're missing dimensions. And so we're going to talk about that. We're actually going to look at it for both area and perimeter because usually, again, I said it earlier, in 5th grade, they're going to challenge you a little bit more, and that could just be something that they throw at you to throw you off. So how I like to do it, first off, if I know I'm going to be finding the perimeter of this, it's kind of like those last two, I'm just going to put a P here and put a question mark. Those last two formulas really don't help me too much here because one was dealing with a rectangle and one was dealing with a square. I could maybe look into dividing these shapes up. In other words, or dividing this shape up, I could look at it into like, okay, well, can I turn it into a rectangle? Could I turn it into a square? Could I turn it into 2 rectangles? That type of thing. It kind of just depends on what type of shape you're dealing with. But for perimeter, though, I really could still just fall back on adding all sides, which is probably what I'm going to do to solve this one. So first off, I'm going to put some question marks where I don't see dimensions. So there's actually 2 spots. There's kind of a spot at the top where it's kind of short, and then there's a spot at the bottom where it's a little bit longer, and I don't have the dimensions there. I could definitely tell that these are in meters because they marked them with an M, and so my first job is probably going to be finding those missing dimensions. So what I want to do here is I want to think about a strategy on how I could do that. I'm going to switch colors here to do this because I think it just makes it stand out. So I'm going to start at the bottom. So this bottom line here that is my red line, in my mind, I'm kind of thinking, okay, well, if I look directly above it, I have 2 areas that do have dimensions. And if I were to put those 2 together, that would create that bottom line. In other words, it would be the same dimension, it would be the same length if I just combine those 2. So if I have a 5 and a 3 and I combine that, I know that that's going to be 8. So I'm going to label the bottom as 8 meters. Okay, and then now I'm going to switch to just a different color just so we're kind of all looking at the same thing here. I'm going to go to green. Well, on the left side here, I know I see 4 meters. And on the right side, I see 3, but then I have one little spot there where I don't see it. And it's kind of the same thought process. Now I'm just kind of looking left to right. On the left side, I see 4 meters. On the right side, I see 3 meters plus a little bitty, gap there where it didn't give me anything. Well, if I wanted to make it the same, I'm thinking, okay, well, what plus 3 is going to give me 4? And that's pretty easy. So I'm going to say that's going to be 1 meter. So now that I have all my dimensions, again, if it were me, I would probably just fall back on adding all sides. And if I go and I add all sides here, I should get the answer. So I would probably just go slow. I would make sure I'd probably start with one side and just kind of, basically follow what perimeter is, which is around the outside, and I'm just going to add everything up. So I'm going to switch here. and I just want to double check and make sure I get everything. So I'm going to start with the 4. So if I go here and I go kind of around the side, I've got 4, and I'm just going to list them here. I've got 4, I've got 8. I'm going to keep going here. I've got 3, I've got another 3, I've got the 1 that I found, and then traveling all back around, I've got a 5. All right, and really stacking up all those numbers together, you know, a lot of kids, especially these, because these are pretty low, you would probably be thinking, well, I can probably just add this up in my head, which is true. I mean, these are low enough numbers. What you might be looking at, though, you might be looking at something like this, but they have decimals. And so maybe you just have to go a little bit slower, and you have to really think about setting up your problem so you don't make any silly mistakes. But for this one, if I start with 4, I'm just going to kind of break it up here. 4 and 8, that gives me 12. I'm going to do 3, 3, and 1. That gives me 7. And then I've got another 5 down at the bottom. And so if I take that, split that apart, 7 and 5 gives me 12, plus another 12. That gives me 24. I think I have a perimeter here of 24 meters. So kind of going back over before we shut this one down, this video down, again, don't, perimeter is such an easy skill. Don't be fooled by it, because it definitely can be on your test. I think what I like to at least go back to in my classroom is, especially because this is probably going to show up in a word problem. There's a really good chance it's going to be in a word problem. Go back to the basics about perimeter. Think about what it is. Think about it being the measurement around a shape or around an object. Think about keywords. Think about real life examples. Again, think about something. I'm sitting in a room right now and I'm thinking about how perimeter could be used in here. And so, like in this room I'm sitting in, I can definitely see perimeter. I'm looking at my TV, and around my TV is this black kind of trim that's going around the TV. Well, that could be perimeter because I said a key word there, and that is around. And so there's just little things that you kind of have to, take away from it. It's not just going and adding all sides, and that would be pretty easy. They're going to probably challenge you a little bit more than that when it comes to perimeter. So, but overall, like just basics about perimeter and the math behind it, I think this video should get you heading in the right direction.